Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Scott Hayward. So would you ask Mr. Hayward to come back in, please? Good morning, Mr. Hayward.
Good morning, sir.
Hope you're well. I hope you're ready to carry on.
I am indeed, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Billett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel. Good morning, Mr. Hayward.
Morning.
Before I start, may I just mark the day by saying that this is day 200 of the oral evidence of this phase of the inquiry. Can I ask you, by way of starting day 200, about Exercise Florian in December 2012? Exercise Florian, you may remember, took place on December the 20th of that year, some 10 months after the publication of policy number 790 in February 2012. We have a witness statement from SOM Bagnell, who says that it was an exercise that involved a number of control officers in the control room receiving calls from other brigade members, acting as callers in potentially FSG situations. That's what he says in his witness statement, and I'll just give the reference, LFB 001228221, page 15, paragraph 54. Do you agree with his summation of that exercise that I've just read out to you?
I'm not overly familiar with Exercise Florian, to be honest with you. Have you got some more detail on that, please?
Did you have any involvement in the planning or delivery of the exercise?
I probably did. I just don't recall the exercise. We did a few exercises.
Right. Well, let me see if I can help you answer the question you've just asked me.
Thank you.
Could we go to LFB 001228227? This is the facilitator briefing for Exercise Florian, dated the 15th of November 2012, a month or so before it took place. That's page 1. If we go to page 2, there's a question, why? First bullet point, Lacknell House. FSG policy, full policy requires exercising audit purposes. Do you remember whether the exercise was attempting to remedy deficiencies found during the Lacknell House incident so far as concerns FSG policy?
I believe it was, so yes.
Right. Can we go to page 6? We can see that it was a high-rise scenario. High-rise fire, 7th floor, maisonettes, location TBC, 3 FSG calls, 4 persons. You see that?
Yes.
Do you know, can you help me, why a decision was made to include only 3 FSG calls when at Lacknell there were 5?
No, I can't explain why we would have gone to that. I think it was just the fact that we used 3 FSG calls, perhaps because of the amount of staff that were doing it at the time. I can't recall exactly why it was only 3.
Right. So does that tell us? And if you can't remember, you can't remember. But does that tell us that the number of FSG calls identified for the purposes of the exercise was calculated on the basis of the staff available on the day?
No, I don't. I can't answer that question. I don't think it was. I think 3 was just the number that they chose at the time for the exercise.
Right. Who chose that number? Do you know?
I don't know.
Do you know who was involved in designing this exercise, so far as the control room element was concerned?
SOM Bagnell and OST, I would suspect.
Now, if we go to page 2 again, you'll see that it says, as I read to you, full policy requires exercising, and then audit purposes. Can you tell me what that means? Full policy requires exercising.
Well, they're checking the policy and make sure it's valid. Going through the exercise.
Oh, I see. Not that the policy itself requires an exercise, but the exercise is needed in order to test.
Yeah, to test the policy.
Yes, I see. And audit purposes. Do you know why, or perhaps by whom, the policy or the efficacy of the policy was being audited at that time?
I think what was being said there is the fact that it was being tested and then feedback to see if there were any deficiencies. So, to audit, maybe not the right terminology, but I think it was just to test and make sure that the policy made sense and worked.
I see. So was it the case that the purpose of this test or this exercise, was to test policy 790, which was only 10 months old at this stage, for the purposes of being able to perhaps defend it or explain it in the Lakenhall House inquest, which was due to start a month or two later in the January of 2013.
I'm not sure that was the purpose. I think we were just exercising the policy.
Right. Did you attend the exercise?
I don't know. I can't recall.
Now, looking at page 3, the exercise objectives was about the FSG information transfer and recording there, not call handling itself. And that's consistent with what we've seen from policy 790 already, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. So that, for example, there was no exercise on how to handle a build-up of concurrent FSG calls in the control room.
No.
Nor how to go about organising a revocation of stay put and what advice to give callers thereafter.
That's correct.
Do you know why there wasn't?
I don't think it was considered.
Can we then go to LFB 001 002 831? This is an email chain from immediately after the exercise. LFB 001 002 831. Thank you. Now, if we look at the second email on page 1 on the screen in front of you, here is an email from Vic Bagnall to MER OST, the OST at Merton, 21st December 2012 at 7:06 in the morning. Subject, live exercise incident, 20th December 2012. And he says, morning OST, yesterday, 20th December 2012, at approximately 13:55 hours, a live exercise called Exercise Florian took place at Brigade Control. And a live procode incident was created, and live calls were made into the control room. Live interactions also took place between Brigade Control and appliances, stroke officers, by telephone and on both Channel 2 and Channel 1. As a matter of urgency, can you please collate all associated recordings for this incident, both emergency and operationally urgent calls and all associated radio traffic? The exercise ran for approximately 1 hour. These are not to be provided to any other staff without talking to senior managers in the first instance. That came through to MER OST. It was also copied to you, as you can see, and you respond a little bit later that morning. Morning, Vic. Can you also ask Liz, Jackie, Alex and Chris for any feedback from their point of view? I am looking at lessons learned for us, in particular that I can report back at the next Lakenhall board. I think we have already identified the issues with the exercise itself. First, who were Liz, Jackie, Alex and Chris?
They were the on-watch team at the time.
Was Chris Sharp?
No, I think that was Chris Bobby, but I can't be 100% sure.
Chris Bobby?
Yeah, he was an operations manager.
Right. And Alex, was that?
Alex Norman. She was
Alex
an
Norman.
assistant operations manager, I believe, at the time. In fact, Chris Bobby might have been an assistant operations manager.
Yes. And Liz and
Liz
Jackie?
Hims was the operations manager, and Jackie, I can't remember her surname, but I think she was an assistant operations manager.
Right. Were they the 4 CROs or mock CROs who handled the FSG?
No, they would have been in charge of or they would have been the supervisors in the room for the exercise.
Did they provide feedback to you?
I can't recall, but if I asked for it, I suspect they did.
Do you remember what the issues that you had identified?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Because you say we have already identified the issues.
Yeah.
Do you know who you carried that exercise out with?
I'm afraid I don't.
Do you know why the feedback was to be reported to the Lakenhall House board?
I'm sorry, I don't recall at all.
Do you know whether there was any feedback to the Lakenhall House board?
I don't.
Now, the next Lakenhall House board meeting didn't in fact take place after this until the 30th of September 2013, so some 9 months later. Can we go to the minutes of that meeting? LFB 000 50644. This shows us two things. Here is the Lacknell Board minutes, 30th of September 2013, and you can see that you were not present, in fact, at that meeting. But if you go to item 4 on that page, minutes of last meeting, which is the first thing we take from it, 14th December 2012, minutes confirmed as accurate. And the point is, and I'd invite you to accept, that that meeting took place before Exercise Florian, and therefore this next meeting was the next meeting thereafter.
Okay.
Yes. We've found no reference in this minute to any feedback from Exercise Florian. Take that from me. Is it right, if I'm correct about that, that you didn't, in fact, in the end, provide any feedback to the Lacknell House Board about the outcomes of Exercise Florian from the control room perspective?
I don't know is the answer.
Do you remember whether you provided feedback to anybody else, for example, AC Brown?
Again, I don't recall the exercise at all. So, except for the emails you've shown me, I really can't give any more information. I'm sorry.
Now, can I ask you then to go to LFB 00118958? This is an email to Dave Brown from David Lindridge on the 9th of January 2013. So shortly after his review and report that we've already seen, subject re-exercise Florian discussion, and the first paragraph says all, and I just should point out to you that you were one of the recipients of that email, if you can see
I see that, thank you.
As well as Vic Bagnall. And he says, all in summary of our discussion today, the following observations were shared for further consideration. I have structured these comments around the relevant policy / documentation, but as the owners, you may feel they would be better addressed elsewhere. And then in relation to PN 790, he says halfway down the page, explain the use of airwave, introduce a means to distinguish main scheme comms with the ICP, etc. And then he says this, provide detail around the use of secondary comms networks and the need to avoid multiple simultaneous lines of communications. Now, did that refer to the communication exchange about FSG calls between control and the incident ground?
No, I believe it was to do with what communication methods we will use. So, telephone or the FLONOPS channels or mobile phone. And I think, and we established a direct dial interface line on our communication system that they could dial directly into and get a supervisor. So I think it was about the amount of information coming through on different communication mediums. Right.
Was, quotes, the need to avoid multiple simultaneous lines of communications, unquotes, an aspect of the exercise?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
I mean, was it a topic or problem or issue, if you like, that had come out of the exercise?
I think the issue was the fact that we were trying to contact the CU perhaps, and if we couldn't get them on one communication medium, we would try another. So, and with only two in the command unit, they may have been overwhelmed with not being unable to answer those calls.
Right. Can we take it, looking at this email and doing the best you can with your memory, that the exercise Florian had identified a problem with communication between the control room and the command unit on the incident ground, which had resulted in multiple simultaneous lines of communication?
Yes, for communication mediums, yes.
Yes. Do you know what was done by the Brigade to cure or address that problem?
Yeah, I think we established this direct dial line so that the command unit could ring the back of the desk directly on a specific line.
The back of the desk?
Sorry, the supervisor's desk, where the supervisor's control room.
Anything else? Was that what was done?
I believe that was what was done. Yeah.
If you
Well, no, sorry to interrupt you, but that would provide a route for information coming from command unit to control room.
Yes.
You, a moment ago, talked about the difficulty of getting the command unit to pick up and then using alternative.
Yeah.
Was anything done to try and solve that problem?
Only trying to use one particular method of communication, and that would be the FLARPS channels.
Thank you.
Yes. And am I right in thinking that the multiple simultaneous lines of communication problem arose when using only 3 FSG calls as the exercise?
Yeah, I think it was because we were passing information down, and the command unit staff having to record that information and pass that information on. So if and of course that may happen regularly. You know, on a same call, you know, things might change and they'll ring it through or radio it through.
Yes. Would it follow from that if you increase the number of FSG calls above 3, the greater the risk of multiple simultaneous lines of communication?
Yes, the more information comes down, yes.
If you look a little bit lower down the email, it says exercise documentation. Consider suitable owner of the exercise documentation for implementation into a regular training program. And then it says reduce the volume of radio traffic from the incident. Consider the benefit of running future exercises in a training environment rather than a live control room. Do you know what discussion there was about the need for a regular training program for control in relation to PN 790 and the RIFs?
The RIFs, the
yes,
RIFs.
The RIFs.
The regular training program, I believe, was the command unit training, where command units would come to control and carry out the exercise on the command unit in the car park in Merton, and control would run it from the control room.
And you say the regular training program. How regular was that from January 13?
It ran for around 2 years. There was a direction that came out that all command unit crews are to be trained and station managers to be trained in communications, in the communication between control rooms. If this is what I believe I'm talking about.
Right. You say it ran for around 2 years. When was the first of those?
I think it was mid 2013, and it ran till 15. It stopped in 15, and then restarted. It was an ongoing program.
Why did it stop?
Because of vision.
Because of vision. When did it restart?
Mid 2016, I believe, but I can't be 100% sure.
And how regular was it? Was it monthly or yearly?
It was availability of the CU. So the CUs were released on Strategic Resource, which is a system that the operational staff use to release appliances and crews for training, and then they can cover it with other appliances.
Right.
So it was run through that system. So I'm not quite sure the regularity. It was quite regular.
Right. Now, in relation to the RIFs, if you look up the email, it says, consider a rewording of the RIF to support the completion of the control information form or casualty information poster. What about that? Was there any rewording done in order to support the CIF?
The control information form or the casualty information form wasn't mandated to control, because they collated all the information on the system, so it was written into the system. So whilst it was discussed and it's available, I don't believe it was taken up.
Why is that?
Because it was already recorded on the systems.
I'm not sure I'm really following. The RIF recommendation here is that one should consider a rewording of the RIF to support the completion of the control information form. my question was that rewording actually ever considered as a fact?
I don't recall, but the RIF does lay out what information to provide.
Was the RIF reworded at any stage in light of this recommendation?
I don't know is the answer.
Can I then turn to the Lindridge Review again, January 2013, LFB 000033943, page 6. And I'd like to look with you at Article 14, or Action 14, which is the creation of policy for communications from control to the fireground. And it says this: control staff perceive PN 790 as an operational policy for frontline personnel. Specific observations made as a result of this review have been fed back to the AC OPR and will be considered in a forthcoming review of control FSG policy. Were you told what these specific observations made to AC Brown as a result of GM Lindridge's review actually were?
I don't remember.
Do you know whether the forthcoming review of the control FSG policy referred to actually took place?
I don't know, but I would have thought so. If it was considered, then I'd have thought something would be done about it. But I don't recall. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's strange that you don't recall, given your position at the time. Can you just help me with that?
It was a long time ago, and lots has happened in that time, and unfortunately, I don't recall. I don't recall what happened at that time.
Right. Well, let's see if I can push you a little bit.
Okay.
This is now January 2013. Try and cast your mind back. The Lakenal House inquest has started, or is about to start, within a few days. There's been the Lakenal review for the past 4 years with the Lakenal House board, and now the inquest is on foot. Here is an audit report, or a review, of the 34 actions by Group Manager Lindridge with recommendations. He says here that there will be a forthcoming review of control FSG policy. Can you remember any review of control FSG policy which took place after January 2013?
I think the policy was updated to reflect the gap analysis and the changes that were made to the policy there. So that's the changes that were made. I don't recall what this part of it was.
Right. If we go to page 13 of this same document, the Lindridge Review, as we will see, addresses Action 14 in the review process findings, and Group Manager Lindridge says this: entry on action log, FSG, policy for communications with the fireground, expected outcome, standardise the protocols for sharing FSG information between control and the fireground, and also for maintaining updates from the fireground at control. And then he goes on to say, under review process findings, as follows: PN 790 was authored by representatives from Incident Management Policy and Control. The procedures describes the two-way exchange of FSG information. This was tested in an exercise at Stratford, 16th June 2011, with feedback shared with the authors. Overall, it was a success, but did identify that FSG is resource-intensive at control. The control room trainers explained that the exchange of information within the incident ground works well using the template. Do you know, Mr. Hayward, who it was who provided Group Manager Lindridge with the information that the exercise on the 16th of June 2011, which was the Haygate Challenge, as we've seen, had identified the fact that FSG is resource-intensive at control?
I don't know who passed the information, but it's a fact that FSG is resourceful because it requires 2 people for one FSG call, the call handler and a supervisor or a suitably trained control officer to support them.
Now, you were present, as we established yesterday, at the Haygate Challenge
Yes.
exercise in June 2011. Do you agree with the observation made here by Group Manager Lindridge?
Yes.
Did you recommend any change, either to Policy 790 or to control resourcing, or otherwise instruct anybody to investigate that issue once you'd seen it in Group Manager Lindridge's action reference 14 recommendations?
No, because it was a finding and it was a success, but FSG is resource intensive, and I agree with that. It is, but I don't know. We didn't do any more with it. We know that that's the case.
Yes. So is this simply telling you something you already knew?
Yes.
You see, the way it's phrased is, overall it was a success, but did identify that FSG is resource-intensive at control. Would I be right in thinking that that is that the success was qualified by the presence of a potential problem, namely the resource intensiveness of FSG at control?
I don't necessarily read it that way. I read it was a success, but we know that an FSG calls are resource intensive.
Well, can we leave it this way then, for the present, that it was well known by you and others in control of command, in command of control at that time, that the resource intensiveness of FSG calls within control was a risk?
Yes.
Can I ask you then about AC Chandler's involvement? Can we look back at an email we looked at, I think, yesterday, LFB 000042081? This is an email from you to Vic Bagnall on the 9th of May 2013. You remember it yesterday?
I do.
We looked at the first paragraph closely. If we just look at it again, I'll read it to you again. During my regular meetings with Richard yesterday, we discussed the training issue and the fact that whilst the database is on the system and has a good layout, it is not dynamic and does not provide staff and management with a picture of the state of training for control staff for the next year to 18 months. You see the words training issue there. What was the training issue there? Just reminding you, this is now May 2013.
Yes. I think the issue is the fact that we hadn't had a robust training plan in place.
Yes. And then you go on to say, in the next paragraph, this is now a priority for you to talk to the OST and get the database populated. And then in the next paragraph down, you say training to consider when populating the database. And you've got a number of things in a list: one-day FSG, a fallback exercise, an exercise with WYFRS. I think that's West Yorkshire, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes.
Yeah, and then F3 FSG exercises, like the one Martin Goodall set up late last year. This will test FSG calls and the information exchanges between us and operational colleagues. Now, you refer to Martin Goodall. Was that in fact Tom Goodall?
Possibly. I think there were two Goodalls in the brigade, so that may have been Martin, but I'm not quite sure.
Right. Now, you say, like the one Martin Goodall set up late last year, that would be late 2012. Was that exercise Florian?
Yes.
Right. Was that an exercise that you had discussed with AC Chandler?
Possibly. I can't remember, but that would have been it would make sense.
Right. Did you discuss with Richard Chandler the day before this email the idea of 3 FSG exercises like Florian?
Possibly.
When you said in the sentence I've just read to you, this will test FSG calls,
Yep.
What did you mean by that?
A test exchange of information. That was the idea of those exercises, is to test the information exchange between the fireground and control.
I see. So, as per Florian,
Yes.
as opposed to call handling,
Yes, well, call handling will be part of that process because they'll have to go through the process of receiving the call and making the and then passing that information down.
They're linked, aren't they? Call
Yes.
handling is intrinsically linked to the passing of information
Yes,
to the command unit and vice versa.
yes.
How were the exercises that you were discussing before, the day before this email with Richard Chandler, going to test FSG calls? What did you have in mind?
Well, a very similar process to Florian. I think the operational idea was to set up 12 pump fires around different boroughs, and then use that opportunity to exercise PN 790.
Did they happen?
I certainly remember one that did occur, but I know that officers would come and ask whether we could facilitate the exercise.
Which was the one that did occur?
I don't remember the names of them or whether they were named. It was just the different boroughs. So they'd just been the station manager or the group manager would have contacted control.
Right. So just looking at the proposal for 3 FSG exercises, was there actually a programme that you established whereby there would be 3 FSG exercises, or were they left ad hoc to be arranged between the station manager or...
Yes, they were ad hoc because it was availability of getting those appliances released to carry out that exercise.
Was there any template for the exercise or any design so that you would identify precise things that needed to be tested and outcomes that were desired?
No, we would have used the Florian as a template.
Florian as a template.
As a template.
So those FSG exercises would not have involved any more than 3 FSG calls?
No, I would have thought not.
Was any thought given, either by you privately or during your discussions with Richard Chandler the day before this email, or at all, or with Vic Bagnall at any time, as to whether the number of 3 FSG calls in these exercises would sufficiently test what you wanted to test?
No.
No. Can we look then at LFB 000060701, email 28th of June 2013, so a month on or so from this one. This is an email from AC Chandler to you, at the very top of the page, in which he forwards to you, Scott for info, an email that he had sent to AC Brown, which is the second email on the screen, on page 1 there. Do you see that?
I do.
In that email, at item 14, if we turn the page to page 2, that says, item 14, FSG, policy for communication with the fireground. You see that?
Yes.
And underneath that, he writes, completed 23rd February 12. Yes, this is now in place. It was last amended in May 2013. It is due for review in February 2015. I would, however, question if this should be an operational assurance policy or a mobilising policy, see item 5. Although this policy is in place and the interaction between control, ORT and operational crews is improving, there is still further progress to be made. And then there's some recommended action. We'll look at that in just a moment. Before I come to that, can I just ask you this? Did you discuss this action at all with AC Chandler?
Not that I'm aware of. It was sent to me for info, so it would have gone to Dave Brown.
Right. Were you involved at all in their discussions about this action?
Not that I recall.
Do you know what progress he felt there was still to be made?
No.
Did you yourself do anything to achieve the progress that is hinted at least here? He says at the end of the piece I've just read to you, there is still further progress to be made. Were you involved in that?
Well, yes, because the command unit exercises set up to improve that communication exchange.
Right. I see. So that was how you understood the progress to be achieved.
Yes.
Command unit exercises, right? And if we look at the recommended action underneath it, it says this: focus to be made on the future integrated control training courses recommended in the Rule 43 response to the coroner towards improving and harmonising the language used between control and the fireground, a greater clarification of perceived control triggers and perceived fireground triggers for FSG, exploration of control staff forming an integral part of command unit crews at larger incidents, clarification on who can declare an incident persons reported. Now, on the first recommendation there, focused to be made on the future integrated control training courses, was that done?
Again, the command unit courses was, whilst it was operational staff, control staff were involved, and they worked together to understand PN 790.
So the answer to that is the command unit courses that you say started in 2013, stopped in 2015, and restarted in 2016.
Yes.
That's what you say? Is
yes.
It? Then let's just look at your statement at LFB 000555191. Your first statement, please, at page 26, and let's look together at paragraph 78.2.2. On page 27, I think that should be. No, 28. Thank you. Lovely. Where you say this: the LFB introduced training for all command unit staff and associated station managers. Issue 20 of Operational News, published in November 2011, contained an article on the FSG policy which was to be published later, and Issue 24, published in March 2013, included mandatory training for all operational watch-based staff, SHX. This was not training for control officers. As part of the training, command units came to the control room in Merton and took part in exercises about issues such as two-way communication between control and the incident ground. It took about 2 years for all command unit crews to complete this training. So that's the training I think that you've been referring to this morning, the command unit training. So that's can we take it that was the integrated training that AC Chandler was referring to?
Yes, it was.
Yes. So not, therefore, training for control.
Well, maybe a poor choice of words. It wasn't. It was set up operationally to test the command unit integration, communications. But control staff were involved in that, although it weren't specifically targeted for control. But the actual training itself did include control and did include call taking, call handling.
Yes. Now, you say in that last answer that it wasn't specifically targeted for control. Were the control staff who were involved in the test assessed? Was what they did examined and assessed?
Yeah. So they would receive calls, and it was scripted, but they received calls, and then the trainers would ask them questions about the call handling and what they would do, as well as system issues. Who
designed the command unit training?
I think it was a joint venture between the operational support team and operational staff, but I don't recall who the operational staff member was.
And you say that it was scripted. What part was scripted?
The calls, the actual the calls to the command units.
Right. So does that tell us that in these exercises, the call handler didn't have any discretion to use their own judgment about what they told the command unit?
They could do. They could make their own mind up, but they did within the scripts. There were what they could tell the command unit as a guide.
And in these exercises, was there somebody playing the role of caller?
Yes, the op support team would do that.
So the exercise would involve 3 points of communication, would it? The caller, the call handler, the CRO, and the command unit.
And then, the information flow between those two.
Right. And was the caller's words, were they scripted?
They knew the addresses of where those incidents were, where they were going to be for information to pass down to the command units. And I think there was a nudge on what they could say, but the call just made the call to the call handler based on the information that was there. So anything outside of that, so address, where's the fire and the like, the actual how they respond was up to them.
Right. Was there any element of that part of the exercise, namely the discussions and communications between the caller and the call handler, which tested Appendix 1 of Policy 539, Emergency Call Management, FSG calls?
Yes. Not that specific. No, I don't believe it did.
And was that element of the exercise assessed by anybody in the control room?
It was assessed in the fact that they were asked questions as the calls went through.
Can we then go back to LFB 000676? I'm sorry, LFB 00060701, the email chain we were looking at before, and back to page 2. This is the Chandler Brown email, and you can see under the recommended action there, under the second recommendation, he says a greater clarification of perceived control triggers and perceived fireground triggers for FSG. Was that clarification obtained? Do you remember?
Not that I recall. No.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what perceived control triggers were. That if you go to the bottom, the clarification on the persons reported, that would be a trigger that was subsequently introduced later on.
Right. I see. And on the third recommendation, control staff forming part of command units at larger incidents, was that ever explored?
Yes, it was explored, and I believe it was around 2016, 2017. We invited control staff to go out onto command units to observe. It was explored, and when I left, it wasn't implemented. But control staff were observing, going out to see if there's any benefit of control going out there.
And you say they were invited. Did they actually go?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
But they were there to observe, were they? Rather?
They were, rather than actually be involved in the incident itself.
Right. Now, can we please go to SOM Smith's statement to the Metropolitan Police on this topic? MET 3080606. I'll show you the first page of her statement to identify the document, and then I want to go to page 17 in it, please. There's the first page, and you can see that this is her police statement of the 16th of September this year, 2021. And if we go to page 17, she says this in the last two paragraphs on that page. I recall that Essex FRS had a system whereby control room officers of any rank would crew a command unit on incidents with 5 or more pumping appliances were in attendance. The control officer would work from the command unit and carry out tasks similar to if they were in a control room. This would include logging calls and radio messages, creating plans and mobilising appliances, or responding in the appropriate way to the incident. This meant that control room officers were familiar with what happens on the incident ground and with the CU systems of working. I believe other FRS may use this system, but when I transferred to the LFP, they did not. I wrote a paper in 2016 on this topic as I felt this was a good method of working and I had previous experience of working with CUs. I believe I sent this report to my colleague Scott Hayward in 2016, and I would have expected him to pass this on to Dave Brown, who was Assistant Commissioner AC at that time. DC Webster has requested a copy of this report, but unfortunately I cannot locate a copy of this report. I'm not certain that I sent this report by email. Therefore, although I've checked my emails, I cannot produce the 2016 version of this report. I recall that my colleague Scott Hayward thought my idea was, quotes, ambitious, unquotes, and that the idea was not taken forward at that time. Now, first, do you remember SOM Smith sending you a report with that proposal in 2016?
I do not, but I know she certainly talked about it because I remember her talking about that Essex had that system in place.
So you don't recall a written document containing her proposal?
I don't, but I know because we spoke to Mr. George about it because he was in control then, and like I say, the outcome of that was to put control officers at certain incidents, I think it was above 8 pumps, if we could spare them to go and observe command unit work.
Right. Now, just breaking that up a little bit. First, when you say you don't recall a written document, are you saying you don't recall one way or the other, or that you can say with confidence that you didn't receive it because you don't remember it?
I can't recall one way or the other, but I know there was a lot of discussion about it. Now, she gives the date of 2016. You refer to talking to Mr. George about it. You'll recall that because I showed you yesterday Tom George's, Assistant Commissioner George's root and branch report of July 2016. Mm-hmm. Do you remember whether these discussions with Joe Smith about this exercise and her report predated or postdated his report? I'm not sure. I'd say predated because it was a topic for discussion.
And was the topic of discussion with Tom George in the context of his root and branch review?
No, it was a separate discussion.
Is it right that you considered her idea to be ambitious?
Only ambitious in the fact of getting our staff onto command units.
Ambitious in the sense of getting control room staff out to the command unit?
Yeah.
Why ambitious?
Because it hadn't happened in London before. I wasn't dismissive of the idea. I thought it was a good idea, and the fact it's used in other FRSs. But I think London hadn't had control officers integrate operation like that before, hence why when I took it to Mr. George for him to take it forward.
I see. So your view was that it was ambitious. But just on that, why, if Essex could do it, could London not?
Because they'd already established it within their, from what I understand, it was already established within their control establishment to release staff to do the command unit as well. There's a control staff establishment number on there. In London Control, there wasn't. So it would have been, to do that would have been we'd have to establish posts to be able to do that.
Why not do that?
Well, I'm not saying that you couldn't do that, but it would require funding, obviously, to do that, and a project to set up, and of course training and how that would work in real terms, I suppose, in London.
Yes. Did you think about even looking into that to see if you could, as it were, do an Essex?
Well, no, because Joanne already did, and she said she produced a report. I don't recall seeing a report, but that's not to say she didn't do one.
Presumably her report was in favour.
Yes, absolutely. She was very well in favour of doing it. It was a good idea.
You say you took it to AC George. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's all right.
It's my fault. You say you took it to AC George. What do you remember having a discussion about it specifically?
Yes, and he said let's do some testing and put control staff out on the command units, which is what we did. That's as far as it went before I left.
I see. Can I then ask you about another exercise, exercise Penfold in November 2013, which took place on the 14th of November 2013 at Lexham House, St Margaret's in Barking.
Okay.
Do you remember anything about that?
Possibly when we go through it.
Right. Let's go to LFB 000050487. And this is an email string which, if we pick up at the foot of your screen, comes from Paul True on the 27th of June 2013 to you, copy to Vic Bagnall. Paul True was the borough commander for Barking and Dagenham.
Yep.
And he says, "Hello, Scott, I will wait to hear from Vic." And what that is about is on page 2. If you go to that, please, and look at the foot of the page, he says, this in an email earlier that day to Lindsay Turner, copied to you. Subject 10 pump exercise. Hi Lindsay, one of my watch managers is organising a 10 pump exercise in Barking on the 13th of November. The scenario is a high-rise incident with multiple seats of fire, persons on various floors trapped, and fire survival guidance calls in progress. AC Brown and DAC Mills have agreed to take part in this event. I would really like to involve control to make it as real as possible and ensure as many staff as possible gain from the training. Can you please let me know if you are able to facilitate this? And your reply above that is, morning Paul, Lindsay's left the authority, we would like to support this event and your point of contact will be Vic Bagnall. Were you involved any further in the planning or the delivery of that exercise?
Not directly, no.
If we go then to LFB 000500721, you can see an email from Vic Bagnall, SOM Bagnall, 5th of November 2013, to the Merton Operations Managers, and copied also to Paul True, subject exercise Penfold Managers. It starts, exercises are the best way for organisations such as ours to practice procedures / protocols in a controlled and safe environment, but they also provide a good vehicle to assist us with learning and honing our skills. Brigade Control has participated in exercises from a facilitation perspective in the past, but it is anticipated that we may become more involved in the future. Now, first, do you agree that exercises are important to practice procedures and protocols in order to learn and hone skills?
Yes.
Yes. What did you understand the comment to be whereby he says that control had participated in exercises from a facilitation perspective in the past?
I think this is where we're establishing PN 790 and the fact that we were facilitating that exchange to get operation officers to understand about passing information back to the control room.
So Haygate Challenge and Exercise Florian, would it be right to characterise control's involvement as facilitation?
No, I would have said there was more to it than that.
Right. And how is it anticipated that control would become more involved? As it says, it is anticipated that we may become more involved in the future. Do you know what?
Maybe I can't interpret, but I would make the assumption that because we'd be doing more of these exercises, so we'll be getting more involved in them.
I see. And had there been discussion by this point? Was this put it this way? Was this reflective of the impression that you had gained from AC Tom George's enthusiasm for carrying forward Joe Smith's proposal?
This was before Mr. George and the command unit stuff.
Yes. So was this something that had been anticipated even at this early stage?
Yeah, I believe that it was when Joanne returned from CFOA that the issue around command units. But I believe she's brought it up before then. And when she come in from Essex, she did talk about why aren't London on command units. But
yes.
Do
you know why that had not happened before 2013?
I don't know.
Or before 2012, in fact, as we've seen. Can we go then to Mr. Bagnall's statement at LFB 001222821? If we go to page 14 in that statement, LFB 001222821, page 14, paragraph 52, and this is under the heading Exercise Penfold. Paragraph 52 says this: the exercise involved 4 FSG calls made by control staff attending the training exercise site and required CROs to respond to the FSG calls by following the FSG RIF for guidance and relaying information via radio and telephone to the command units on the incident ground. There were initially 3 FSG calls, and during the training exercise there was an inject where a 4th FSG call was made to reflect the development of the incident. I exhibit a copy of the 3 initial FSG scenarios to this statement and a copy of the inject for the 4th FSG call, and AOM is available in the control room to assist the CROs with responding to the FSG calls. Now, we've seen Exercise Florian, which involved 3 FSG calls. Do you know why a decision was made only to carry out 4 FSG calls? Again, given that Lacknell at Lakanal there had been 5?
No, I don't.
Why not go for it and have 10 or 15 and really test the system?
Because London hadn't experienced, or around the country hadn't experienced any more than that at that time that I was aware of. So when we talk about multiple FSG, we're talking up to around 5. Based on the Lakanal as a previous incident.
But except if it was based on Lakanal as a previous incident, you would have 5. Why 3 up to 4?
I don't know.
Right. Now, in his statement, he explains in the next paragraph, in fact, that following the completion of Exercise Penfold, Nikki O'Shea in the OST team provided feedback which she shared with you and Paul True, who had been the exercise lead, as we've seen. Do you remember that feedback? Do you remember seeing it?
No.
Do you remember sharing any feedback with the operational side?
I did speak. I believe I spoke to Paul True after the incident, but not specifically for the incident itself.
Can I show you LFB 001222826? See if this triggers a recollection. This is the feedback document. Okay. FSG Exercise Penfold, 14th November 2013. Feedback regarding the operational side. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember seeing this document?
I don't.
You don't? You can see that the first back is feedback regarding the operational side, and the second part is under the subheading feedback for us to consider. Is the us, can you help, the control side?
I would suggest it is, yes.
Right. And then it goes on to say, let's see how far we go with this. If this isn't a document you've ever seen before, then the question is, why not?
Well, I don't recall seeing it before. It's not to say I didn't. It was
okay.
Quite a while ago.
On the assumption that you did, can you help me then with the first bullet point under feedback for us to consider? It says, the CIF form does not ask the right questions. Do you remember speaking to Nikki O'Shea to obtain further clarification as to what that meant?
No, I'm not sure what a CIF form is.
You're not sure what a CIF form is?
No.
Well, it could be control information form or casualty information.
Casualty information form, yeah.
So you do know what a CIF form is?
Yes, I didn't know the acronym, that was all. I've only seen it in full. But that's okay. I don't recall speaking to Nikki about that, but that's not to say I didn't.
Do you know what the questions were that she was suggesting were wrong or should be put right?
Is chemistry in the senior control workshops. Control need more questions to help keep conversations going during non-FSG problems without being repetitive. So this is a development of the scripts, because obviously the call handler would take an FSG call, and they would get so far. And if it's an ongoing to maintain the exercise, it just as the information becomes a bit stale. So I think control wanted to develop some more questioning in those workshops to keep the conversation going.
Was the CIF form changed thereafter so that it did ask the right question?
Yeah, I don't. As I've said previously, I believe the casualty information form or the forms were optional for control, and I'm not sure they picked them up, because they were already putting that information onto the mobilising system in the free text. So it's already written there for them. And then they pass that to the command units.
Right. Only she's put this in as an issue for control to consider rather than for the operational side to consider. So the fact that they were optional for control doesn't seem to have made much of an impact on Nikki O'Shea when she did her feedback, does it?
Well, that was something for us to consider, not to mandate or implement. I believe there was further discussion about the use of the information forms, and like I say, I believe they were optional because of the information that's already created. So in effect, the control should be duplicating work because it's already on the command system.
Yes, but if it was already on the command system and the CIF was duplicating work, why was it necessary for Nikki O'Shea to consider the feedback in respect of the CIF form?
Well, because at the time we were obviously looking at those forms, and she identified that they weren't asking the right questions. I don't know what those questions were because I don't remember.
And you don't remember whether any action was taken to remedy that?
Well, like I say, I believe they were left optional for control staff to use.
And then if we go to page 2 of this document, you see under the heading Suggestions, there's a suggestion that in the first bullet point, the AOMs and OM are more involved in order to practice their role within the FSG procedure, such as liaising directly with the FSG CU and SM, Command Unit and Station Manager. Is that something that was actioned in any future training exercise hereafter?
I would suggest this is not. So the AOM that would be supporting the control officer would necessarily liaise directly with the FSG command unit because of the nature. Because obviously that process is the call handler would pass information, and then the AOM or that supervisor would make sure that information was passed to the CU. So that's the involvement. I'm not sure the OM would want to involve more unless they're talking about just the practice as opposed to live.
Well, the suggestion that's made is that the AOMs and the OM should become more involved for the purpose that you can see. My question is, did that happen?
Well, as I said, the AOM is involved because obviously they're the link between the call handler and the communication line. The OM, I don't believe so, but then I'd expect the OM to have more of a bigger picture.
Right. Let me see if I can get at it slightly differently. Here are 2 suggestions on the page by way of feedback from this exercise. Do you know whether anything was done in response to the first bullet point suggestion there?
Not actively, no.
Right. Do you know why it wasn't?
Because, as I said, the AOM already does that part, the integration. I don't know whether they're suggesting it for the exercises or for real.
Did anybody in the command structure, either at your level or above, who received this feedback, look at that suggestion and say, no, we don't need to take that forward?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Would I be right in thinking that overall on what we've seen from this document, this is feedback on the exercise Penfold, not on deficiencies in the policies or the capabilities of the control room staff which were revealed by it?
Yes.
Can I then go back to Group Manager Lindridge? And we've seen that his review was dated the 4th of January 2013. Do you remember that he then carried out further work during the course of 2013 and produced a further report later that year?
I know he was doing some work. I don't know. I don't recall the report as I've seen it.
Right. Let's go to LFB 000083978. Email string, November 2013. If we go to page 4 in that email string, we can see the second email on page 4 is an email from AC Brown to you, copied to David Lindridge, as well as to SOM Bagnall and SOM Diamond, 15th November 2013. Scott, it says, I've just met with Dave Lindridge to discuss whether there are any outstanding pieces in the National Action Plan. As a result, I've asked Dave to discuss with you the following issues to ensure any outstanding issues are completed. And then if you cast your eye down beyond actions 10 and 12, we get to action 14. Creation of policy for communications from control to the fireground. It seems there might be some specific observations made as a result of Dave's review that need to be considered in future reviews of FSG policy. We need to confirm what these observations are Has a review of FSG been completed? Whether these observations have been considered? If not, then why not? Now, first, did you meet with Group Manager Lindridge to discuss these issues?
I've spoke with Mr. Lindridge on a number of occasions. I can't recall this exact, but I have spoken to him, yes.
Right. Did Group Manager Lindridge have any specific observations about what would need to be considered in future reviews of FSG policy?
I do not recall.
You don't remember. Do you know whether they had been considered, or whether they were after this considered?
I don't remember.
When he asks the question, has a review of FSG been completed? At the very end of that section on Action 14, what did you understand AC Brown to mean?
Post Lacanau, whether we've updated our policies after the Lacanau incident and after the gap analysis had been completed.
So is that what you understood him to mean by review of FSG?
I believe so.
Right. Had such a review been completed by this point?
I believe so, yes.
And in what form did that review, or the final review, take? Was there a final report?
No, I think it was just going through the policies and making sure that the changes that were actioned, that were in the gap analysis were put into the documents.
Now, then let's look at his updated review in November 2013. This is at LFB 000833988. Let's have page 1 up on the screen. This is Group Manager Lindridge's updated review, November 2013. And if you go to page 13, you can see Action 14 at the very foot of the page. And in that text, over on page 14, under review process findings, you'll see a new paragraph that was not in the January 13 version of this review report. And it's the second paragraph in review process findings, and it says, an exercise package has also been developed and tested 20th of December 2012 to involve control room operators, command unit staff, fire crews and senior officers. This proved to be successful and utilised all the communications methods. Now, looking at the date, would you agree that the reference there is to Exercise Florian?
20th of December, yes.
Yes, 2012, yes. Was the intention to repeat that exercise?
Not that I'm aware of, no. It was about having these exercises at different boroughs, 10 pump fires, and utilising the FSG element of that to practice it.
Right. And was Exercise Penfold intended to be a repeat of Exercise Florian?
It's similar in its process, yes.
Right. But was it designed to be a repeat of Florian?
Not specifically, I don't believe, no.
Can I then turn to GRA 3.2 and just ask you some questions about that before the break? And Mr. Chairman, we'll get this done, I think, before the break. And I want to ask you about GRA 3.2 in the context of policy number 790. Now, just by way of a bit of background, you may have heard some of the evidence earlier in this module of this inquiry that generic risk assessment, GRA 3.2, was published at the end of February 2014. But as we've heard, the LFB had some responsibility for the process of drafting and consultation on it for a number of years before that. Now, the published version contained a new section which had not appeared in previous sections, entitled Evacuation and Fire Survival Calls, FSG calls. I can show you GRA 3.2 if you like. Perhaps we just ought to have it up. It's at LFB 401255 at page 29. And at the very foot of that page, you can see on your screen a section, Evacuation and Fire Survival Guidance Calls. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, if we go over the page to page 30, you'll see that it continues with a number of unnumbered paragraphs about the responsible person, the RRO, what the incident commander should do by way of following the evacuation plan devised as part of the premises fire risk assessment, and aspects of the stay put policy. Were you made aware before GRA 3.2 was published in February 2014 that changes were going to be made to that GRA so far as they related to fire survival guidance calls and procedure?
Not that I recall.
So is it right that you at least were never consulted on this aspect, or this introduction into GRA 3.2?
Not that I recall.
Did you yourself make any inquiries as to whether there was likely to be anything in the new or forthcoming version of GRA 3.2 that would affect fire survival guidance calls generally, or policy number 790, or for that matter 539 Appendix 1 in particular?
Not that I recall, no.
When it was published, did you or anybody else in control undertake a review of GRA 3.2 to see if there were any matters in it which might impact, which might affect the way control worked?
No.
Or which might necessitate any changes either to PN 539 or 790?
No.
Did you ever consider instructing anybody in control to undertake a gap analysis between the new GRA 3.2 and the existing policies 790 and 539 to confirm that both of those policies remained consistent with GRA 3.2?
No.
Why is that?
I was not aware of the GRA 3.2 was out there and published.
Did you ever... So it would follow from that. Well, let me ask you, when was the first time you became aware of GRA 3.2 dated February 2014, and particularly the fact that it had a section in it relating to fire survival guidance?
Whilst preparing for this inquiry.
Right, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a convenient moment.
Right, thank you very much. Well, at that point, Mr. Hayward, we'll have our break for the morning. We'll come back, please, at 11:30. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Okay, so
or
thank
out of
you.
the room. All right?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. 11:30. Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Hayward to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Hayward, on
Yes.
we go. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, can I then ask you about pre-inquest action number 9, the subject of which is the RIFs, the reference information files? And can we begin with LFB 404801, please, at page 13? This is the assurance report. From 2018, which we looked at yesterday. And under action 9, on the right-hand side of the screen, towards the bottom of page 13, it says this. Action 9, revise the reference information file used by control officers when delivering fire survival guidance in order to ensure that they comply with national guidance. So that we're familiar with what a reference information file or RIF or RIF is, let's just read on. It says below that action point, reference information files provide control staff with a concise summary of the key actions that should be taken for an incident when handling emergency calls. First, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. And then if we go to your statement, your first witness statement at page 7, please. This is within paragraph 20. You deal with action 9 here on the screen in that bullet point, and you say, action 9, the operator and supervisor FSG RIFs were revised by Lindsay Turner and the operational support team, OST, to comply with National Guidance FSC 10/1993 and 54/2004. You see that?
Yeah, I do.
Did you have any role yourself or involvement yourself in revising the RIFs?
Only with the gap analysis to make sure that it was included in the RIFs.
Right. So you didn't supervise the work that was carried out
No.
by the OST by way of revision?
No.
No. Can we then go to what SOM Smith says, Jo Smith says in her statement, LFB 00121219 at page 11, paragraph 26. What she says is this, and this is in answer to the question, please detail your involvement with the revision of the FSG RIFs for CROs and control supervisors. And she says this, I was involved in the first revision of the FSG RIFs for CROs and the introduction of supervisor RIFs. I recall that in September 2010 I proposed a redraft of the RIFs. I recall that Scott Hayward and I discussed the types of useful information to obtain from callers and therefore to put on the RIF. Is she right about that? Did you have a discussion?
We would have discussed it on the back of during the Lacanau inquiries. Yeah, so yes, we would have done.
Do you remember what you discussed with SOM Smith?
No,
Did you approve her updates to the RIF?
I don't recall, but I would have done. She is in my opinion, the subject matter expert for it.
Right. Did they need to be reviewed or approved by anybody else? For example, AC Brown.
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Do you know whether they needed to or not?
They would have gone to the board to say that they've been updated and they are available to the board to have a look themselves. Whether they did or not, I can't confirm.
When you say the board, do you mean the Lacanau House?
The Lacanau House board. Sorry, yes.
So you think they went to the Lacanau House board for approval or just for information?
Just to say that they'd been revised.
Right. Was that just a piece of information, or was the Lacanau House board actually shown the text of the RAF?
I believe they would have been given a copy of the RIF. It was available to them as all the documents were for the Lacanau board.
Right. What about the training department? Were they provided with the revised RIFs?
Yeah, the training department, OST, yes.
Right. That's say OST, but not beyond OST.
No, operationally, no.
Not operationally, no. Can we then look at your third statement, please? LFB 00121176 at page 13. And I'd like to look with you, please, at paragraph 49, where you answer the question at 5C. Please explain what consideration, if any, was given to the challenges posed by incidents involving multiple FSG calls as part of the revision of the RIFs. And your answer at paragraph 49 is this: I believe the Lacknell House fire involved at most around 5 concurrent FSG-related calls. Following the fire at Lacknell House, it was not considered that multiple, quotes, FSG calls would likely exceed 5 concurrent FSG calls in relation to a residential high-rise fire. Therefore, revisions of the RIFs did not consider circumstances in which the control room was receiving more than 5 concurrent or multiple FSG calls. From the year 2009 until June 2017, Mr. Hayward, do you recall being made aware of any incidents that involved more than 5 FSG calls?
Not concurrent. So I believe there was a fire. Adair House was a FSG fire, but I don't believe, and I believe there was 7 or 9 FSGs, but I don't believe they were concurrent.
Adair Tower was 31st of October 2015. Mm-hmm. Have you seen any documents or reports of that fire to lead you to the belief that none of the 7 to 9 FSG calls were not concurrent?
Only the log, the post-action log that controlled it.
I'd like to ask you about a fire in Poplar in November 2010 at the Marriott Hotel, which was a 10-pump fire. Do you have any recollection of that?
There were a lot of fires in that area, so I'm aware that there were fires, not that particular fire.
Right. Do you remember the fact that there were 17 FSG calls received during the course of that fire?
No.
Can we go to LFB 00110785? If you look at page 2 in that email run, please. This is an email from Andy Hickmott, right at the very bottom of the screen, and over to the top of page 3. It's dated 12th of November 2010, from Andy Hickmott to you and Dave Brown, copied to Peter Cowap, Rita Dexter and Ron Dobson, and it's the Daily Bulletin. And if you go over the page, he says this: with regard to last night's 10 PF, that's pump fire, as I'm sure you've been made aware, this was a particularly challenging incident for control, given the number and nature of fire survival calls that they handled, some of which went on for over an hour. Despite the pressures, the way information was passed to the fireground, enabling searching and in some cases rescues to be undertaken, seemed excellent. I visited control after I left the incident about 3 a.m. and thanked Keith Diamond and his staff for all their efforts. It seems some of them really earned their money last night, and you may wish to look into whether it deserves formal recognition. Do you remember why it was a, quote, particularly challenging incident for control given the number and nature of fire survival calls, unquote?
I do not.
Now, we know that SOM Smith sent you an email about this incident a little bit later in November 2010. Can we look at that? It's at LFB 000-33213, 33213, and on page 1, she says to you, that this is 30th of November 2010, Hi Scott, I've asked Redwatch to carry out a debrief of this incident in anticipation of a PRC where we can either attend or feed back information relating to the communications. I imagined the outcomes from the PRC then being looked at in line with FSG work, and any recommendations then being taken to the board for approval. As I was in attendance on the night, and I have already taken some relevant issues and discussed them with Pat at last week's meeting, it is really the information flow that Pat and I are working on. Thanks, Joanne. Do you remember whether you responded to that email? We haven't been able to find a response.
I don't recall. I mean, I would have done if she'd have emailed me.
Right. Do you remember whether you took any action in reply to it?
Well, she's already said that she's worked. It's about the information flow, so I assume it's the fact that there's the flow from the control room to the fireground and vice versa.
Right.
So she's talking with Pat, who was a DAC. I can't remember his second name now.
Is that Utting?
No.
He was station manager.
Oh, it may be. It may be, if they're talking about information flow, it could be Pat Utting, but I can't be sure. But from the information there, she's already taken action, so she's just telling me.
Right. I mean, to help you on the Pat question, if you look a little bit or scroll a little bit lower down page 1, you can see that the email which comes to you through this email, which is the next in the string, which is from Peter Cowap to you, also goes to Pat Utting.
Right, so probably is Pat Utting then. Yeah.
Yes. Now, you don't remember then taking any action in response to this?
No.
Email, just to be clear. Now, let's then look at a spreadsheet from the Incident Monitoring Database, or IMD, at LFB 000333654, and we'll need the native version of this, please. That's LFB 000333654. And if you go to line 34 in the spreadsheet, you can see that on the 11th of November 2010, there is a primary fire with the reference 1915799101. And if you scroll across to column L, it's a 4+ pump fire, and ops monitoring ORT in column M. And then if you look across to column V, you can see the comment, identified need to systematically manage fire survival calls, appointed dedicated SM to deal and provide command support and resources in the form of an additional CU and appliance crews. Now, did you ever see this spreadsheet at the time, do you think?
I may well have done. I don't recall seeing it, but I may well have done.
Right. Were you aware of the need at the time to, quote, systematically manage fire survival calls?
Yeah, and I think, again, this is about the passing of information of fire survival calls. This is an ORT, so they'd have been on the fireground monitoring information coming into the fireground.
Right. Does this tell us whether there was any problem in control about managing fire survival calls systematically?
I would say no, because it's an ORT report, so they're reporting on the receipt on the fireground, not in control.
Was there a debrief or performance review of this incident for the control room?
We would have been invited to one, I suspect. I didn't go to it. Right. Whether Joanne did or Keith. Keith, right, being the officer at the duty, may well have attended.
Now, given that this incident had 17 FSG calls, is it fair for us to conclude that the brigade at least recognised that an incident could generate many more than 5 FSG calls?
If that's the case, if there was 17 concurrent fire survival calls on that incident, I'm surprised it's not flagged up anything more, because I don't remember 17 fire survival guidance calls.
Well, even if they were not concurrent, but all sequential, and given that some of them lasted for more than an hour, I would suggest to you that that was unlikely, given the email we've seen about the efforts made by Som Diamond's team on the night. Even if they were all sequential, an incident generating 17 FSG calls, I would suggest to you, would be something which would lead you to think, wouldn't it, that you needed to train for at least many more than 5.
And you know, fire survival calls come in many different guises. Certainly back then, where if we provided a little bit of advice to a caller, we'd mark it down as fire survival guidance call, and then subsequently nothing else happens or that person evacuates. So it's also about sustained fire survival guidance calls. I agree, but I think sometimes the interpretation of of the calls themselves. So yes, I would agree we would do, but I'm not. I don't recall this incident. I certainly don't recall 17 fire survival guidance calls.
But is this right? By late 2010, policy 539, although it had been revised quite substantially in September 2010, as you may remember, still had Appendix 1 and a detailed definition of what a fire survival guidance call was.
I believe so.
And part of that definition, for good or ill, was that it was a call where the control room operator remained on the line giving advice continually to the caller, where that caller was trapped.
Trapped, yeah.
Therefore, it would be difficult, wouldn't it, to mistake a call for an FSG call when it wasn't?
In that situation, I'd agree, but I do. Yes, okay.
Have you seen any information or any evidence to suggest that of those 17 FSG calls, any of them were not properly FSG calls?
Well, I mean, some people aren't necessarily trapped, but they just want a bit of advice from a call handler. You know, if they're in a high rise and they're not affected by heat, smoke, or fire, but they're still a bit unsure about something, the call handler may offer a little bit of advice, and that may well go down as fire survival guidance because we're giving some sort of guidance, but it's not necessarily a fire survival guidance in the fact that the caller is trapped.
Well, if that's the case, that would indicate, wouldn't it, that there's some kind of misrecording of the nature of calls.
I'm talking now back then. I mean, it's obviously revised since then, and I think we're a lot clearer on what a fire survival guidance call is.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hayward, but I don't believe there were any substantial revisions of policy 539, emergency call handling, between September 2010 and some time at least after this event. And in fact, as at the date of the fire, although there were subsequent revisions.
Okay.
Coming back to the point, do you know whether you considered asking OST to update the RIFs to account for more than 5 FSG calls?
No, I don't.
Or planning for this kind of event within Brigade control?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Can we then look at pre-inquest action 11? And this is initial FSG training. Can we start going back to the Lachinal Assurance Review of 2018, LFB 404801? And I'd like to go in that document, please, to page 14 and look at a pre-inquest action 11. Left-hand side, halfway down. Text in red: deliver initial fire survival guidance FSG training, which complies with the national guidance to control room officers, CRO, in order to develop the performance of the CROs when handling FSG calls. And then underneath that, it says this: the Brigade reviewed fire survival guidance training, conducting a gap analysis of current training with national guidance, Fire Service Circular 1093, training of fire control staff, before developing a suite of training presentations covering fire behaviour, building structure, types and concepts, fire survival and emergency call handling techniques to meet the requirements of both national guidance and Brigade policy. These training presentations were initially delivered to all control staff between July and September 2011. Now, just pausing there, if I can, what did the initial 2011 FSG training consist of?
What, presentation-wise?
Well, what were the elements of the initial training in 2011?
So it was a fire survival guidance presentation. There was a presentation on fire behaviour and building structure. And there was a further presentation, but I can't recall what it was.
Right, I think I can help you a little bit.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get to this a little bit more quickly. If you go to your statement, your first statement at paragraph 20 on page 7, you say towards the bottom of the page, you say under Action 11, following the review of training as part of the gap analysis, see Action 5, the revised initial FSG training was delivered to control officers between July and September 2011. I provide further information about FSG training below. Now, we'll look at those presentations in detail later on in your evidence, but just for the moment, I just want to establish with you what the presentations were that made up that initial fire survival training given to new entrants. Can we go to your third statement, LFB 00121176, please, at page 3, and I'd like to go to paragraph 13 in that statement, and you say this, in answer to the question, query 1b, little Roman 1, where the assurance review refers to a suite of training presentations, please confirm how many different presentations are included in that suite. And you say, I understand that the suite of training presentation consisted of 3 separate presentations, and you then identify those in paragraph 14 if we turn the page. And you can see 3 there: building types and concepts, fire survival guidance, and fire survival training, introduction to fire and human behaviour, 10th March 2010. Were those the 3 elements of the initial training for existing control staff?
Yes.
Just to be clear, initial training, I may have misled you by calling it new entrance training, but by initial training.
Initial training.
Do you mean, is that for new entrants or for existing staff?
It's for new entrants and existing staff.
So it was, right, so it was training for...
It was training documentation for
Right.
FSG.
Whether or not they were new entrants or whether they were already employed.
I believe so, yeah.
I see. Did you have any involvement in relation to the development of any of those elements of that training?
No.
Now, let's look at LFB 00028258, page 2, bearing in mind your last answer. At page 2, at the bottom of that page, is an email from Chris Sharp on the 22nd of February 2010 to you, SOM Turner, SOM Stibbards, and others, providing notes of a meeting that you had on the same date. And the email is entitled Fire Survival Planning Meeting, 22nd of February 2010. If we look at the paragraph under background, right at the foot of the screen, it says this: POM Scott Hayward explained the background for the need for more fire survival training, and that elements identified in the gap analysis between 1093 and BCTS training have to be covered. SH to send copy of gap analysis to MA. Now, this was at a time when you hadn't yet completed, but were about to complete, I think, your gap analysis in the April of that year, 2010, wasn't it?
I believe so, yeah.
Do you know what prompted this meeting?
The post-Lacanau.
You say post-Lacanau.
So after the obviously we were doing pre-inquest work anyway to identify if there were shortfalls in our fire survival guidance. So we preempted that and started looking at it in more detail to try and improve the training.
So was this part of what would become a recommendation in the gap analysis?
Yes.
And were you directing what information had to be included in the training packages?
No, I was providing the gap analysis for them to include into. So I mean, I was merely taking or looking along with Joanne and Mr. Cutbill and Mr. Davis, looking at what was not in our own training compared to the national guidance at the time.
Right. So you were comparing or examining the content of the training?
Yes.
Yes. Let's then look at the first email in the same document run, page 1. We see an email that you sent back to Chris Sharp by way of response, copied to Lindsay Turner and Joanne Stibbards, as well as Robin Hannon. And you say, good morning, having reviewed what was discussed yesterday, I am still not totally convinced that our particular part of the training package is right. The purpose of the training is to provide a good grounding for control officers to enable them to provide FSG to a caller when required. I thought the FS aspects of the day are very good. Paul Jenkins' presentation was particularly interesting and relevant. However, out of the full day's training, we only provide perhaps 2 hours' worth of training, a bulk of that listening to calls. I agree with Joanne, that's Jo Smith, that some sort of role play should be introduced the following day or as part of an assessment at the end of the week to consolidate the day and to give the students an opportunity to attempt to provide that guidance in a controlled environment. And I'll read a little bit more of this email to you. I would also like to see the presentations beefed up with excerpts of FSG calls to reinforce the statements we are giving. The examples of proactive questions have not been changed. It has been noted that 2 of the questions are in fact statements and offer no advice or assistance to either the officer or the caller. Proactive questioning is about assessing the situation, gathering intelligence and providing direct assistance to the caller whilst proffering information to gain an insight into the environment the caller is in. The examples provided on the slide do little to highlight the fact. I suggest we revisit 1093 and review our current training presentation. To be honest, in comparison to the FS input, we fall behind a little. Can we make the subject more punchy? I do not mean to sound negative, and I know that a lot of work has been done to improve the training packages so far. This particular subject is obviously of great interest in all quarters at the moment and likely to be until outcomes of the inquiry. I want to make sure we're providing the most up-to-date and relevant information available to our staff. In the meantime, we'll be putting together a letter to CLG, etc. Now, that email suggests, do you agree, that you were providing feedback on the initial FSG training?
Yes.
Yes. Why did you do that?
Again, it was our, we were looking at what happened at Lacanau and what could be done to improve it. We looked at the original training materials, and that was my feedback.
Do you know
not
whether
just mine? That was our feedback.
Right. Do you know whether your feedback was taken into account before the presentations were finalised?
Yeah, I believe they were. Some of it. I mean, I think I went back again because they did make some revisions. It still weren't quite the way it could have been. It could have been better. So I believe I did send further communication or spoke to them verbally about some more tweaks.
Right. Did you sign off or approve the training packages?
Not. I didn't sign anything. I mean, I saw the last presentation, and it was agreed that they were good to go.
You say it was agreed that they were good to go.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably you provided your agreement to that.
Yes.
And had you not agreed that they were good to go, they wouldn't have gone.
No.
So, in that sense, am I right to suggest to you that you did have?
Yeah. Okay. I agreed along with my experts that it complied with 1093.
And your experts were?
Joanne Smith, Lindsay Turner.
Yes. And did you get approval specifically from AC Brown to sign off?
No.
Packages?
No.
Did you continue to oversee the detailed development of the FSG training hereafter?
Not the detail, no.
Now, I next want to turn to the question of when this initial training first took place after the Lacanau House fire. Can we go back to your first statement, please, at paragraph 74 on page 25? That's LFB 000555191, page 25, paragraph 74, at the foot of the page, under the heading Chronology of FSG Training. You say this: in 2010, a full day's FSG training took place. As was confirmed to the board on the 15th September 2010, all available staff, those not on long-term absence, received this training. Now, the board here is the Lacanau House board, I think.
It is indeed, yeah.
And we'll come to examine that board in a little bit more detail later on. But when you say this training, all available staff received this training, was that all 3 of the presentations that you've identified?
I believe so.
And did all staff receive all 3 presentations on all occasions?
During this period?
Yes.
I believe so.
Have you been able to identify which training was delivered in which years, in and after 2010?
No.
Why is that?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Can you put that question again, please?
Well, you've got this training, these 3 packages,
Yeah.
which you say were delivered
Yep.
to all available staff.
Yes.
After 2010, was that training delivered to all staff?
Except the call handling. The call handling would have only gone to, or the behaviour, call behaviours have only been delivered to new entrants, because obviously the existing staff are, familiar with call behaviour, because they take the calls every single day.
So, when you say call handling, which one is that? Is that fire survival guidance or fire survival training, introduction to fire and human behaviour?
The human behaviour.
Right. So that one was only for new entrants, but the other 2 were, or the idea was that they would be delivered to all staff on a continuing basis.
Yes.
Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Now, did it take a full day in 2010 to deliver those 3 presentations to the staff?
We allocated a full day. We allocate a full day, so yes.
Did it take the full day?
No, it wouldn't have taken the full day. Obviously, there was breaks and lunch, so probably 4 or 5 hours.
Well, we call that a full day.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's a full day then.
Right. How were they presented for them to fill a full day, allowing for breaks and lunch?
What do you mean, presented?
Run me through what happened. Were the presentations were presented, were they, before a group of eager students?
Yes.
And then slowly they were taken through it, such that the sessions would take up the day?
They were taken through it, and then obviously it's an interactive, like all training, it's interactive, and we want feedback from staff. So the presentations could last, an hour and a half, and it would depend on the interaction of the staff, whether that rolls over or goes longer or not.
Right. So they were teacher-led?
Yes.
And interactive in the sense that students could ask questions?
Yes.
Was there any role play involved in those?
Yeah, there was.
Now, I'd like to look at some email correspondence about this. Can we go to LFB 001 07484, please? And before I ask you about this, just to pick you up on, or pick up a question, the 1 day's training, how did you find the time to do that whilst on the watch? Or was it done off the watch?
It was done off the watch at this particular time.
So there was no difficulty in 2010, was there, in having this training delivered off the watch?
No, I had 4 watches, 24 per watch.
But there came a time when that became problematic.
It did, yes.
Can you identify a date? I think we could probably do it from what you've told us so far.
Yeah, obviously when we went to the new shift patterns.
That was 2011, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then we lost 5 to CAMS, and then we lost, so around 2012.
I see. Yes. Now, looking at the email run, can we go please to the bottom of page 1 and look at the second email there, which is an email from Chris Sharp to various staff, dated the 21st of January 2010, and copied to GVP Control Training and Lindsay Turner. Would you have seen this document?
Not if it wasn't sent to me.
Well, it says GVP Control Training.
I wasn't GVP Control Training.
And she sets out the plan for the new entrant day on the 10th of March 2010. If you turn over turn over the page, you can see that halfway down your screen it says the date for the first new entrant day is Wednesday 10th March, day 43 of the course to be conducted at Southwark and Skyline House. And then she identifies the plan. Just help me with day 43 of the course. Does she really mean day 43?
Potentially, yeah. It's a 9-week course.
It's a 9-week course.
Yeah.
And then the plan for the fire survival new entrant day is, and she identifies 6 items. 1, call handling techniques conducted by control trainers. 2, basics of fire and fire development conducted by FS. And FS stands for?
Fire safety.
Yes. 3, fire development in the firehouse at SWK, I think that's Southwark.
Yes.
Conducted by fire safety, FS. 4, building types, means of escape, conducted by FS. 5, case studies, human behaviours, conducted by FS. 6, fire survival guidance, the policy and RIF, conducted by controlled trainers. That was, am I right, the itinerary or plan for the new entrant initial FSG training in 2010?
Yes, for new entrants.
For new entrants. Now, 4 of those 6 elements were to be conducted by members of the fire safety team, because you can see the FSs there. That's 2, 3, 4, and 5. If we then go to LFB 000092719, I'm going to show you an email about this later in that year. This is an email from Chris Sharp to control staff, some of whom may be familiar to the panel, Debbie Real, Alex Norman, as well as Vic Bagnall and others, and also Lindsay Turner and Joanne Stibbards, and you, Mr. Hayward, as you can see.
Yep.
The subject is fire survival training. Hello, everyone. For your information, we still have spaces for the following dates, and there are a set of dates and spaces there set out, and some joining instructions underneath that. If you look a little bit further down, you can see she says, just above the bottom of the page, it is imperative that we complete this training as soon as we can. The following are still to be nominated. You see that?
Yes.
And then there's a long list over the next few pages of people to be nominated. If we then go to LFB 000092720, these are the instructions document that she attached to that email. Let's look at that. It's entitled Joining Instructions for Fire Survival Guidance Training. The structure of the day is start time 8:30, finish time 16:30. And then you can see various details there, location, uniform, equipment, etc. And then the course consists of, and there are some bullet points, call handling techniques, an interactive session looking at general challenges presented to call takers conducted by BCTS, fire and behaviour of people, building construction, fire survival policy, and then if you look at the last bullet point, practice, inputted by BCTS. This session is not accessible and is designed for people to practice in a safe and supportive environment. Was that the role play?
Yes.
Why was it not accessible?
I don't know, it should have been.
Yes. Indeed. And you say it should have been. Maybe we can keep this short. Am I right that you say it should have been because the Home Office training document from 1994, Keeping People Safe, said it should?
Yes.
Yes. I can keep that short then. Now let's go then on to, or back to the National Assurance Report, LFB 0004801, page 14. We've already looked at this section of the report dealing with pre-action or pre-inquest action 11, but I just want to pick it up with you again. At the bottom of the first paragraph, as we've seen, it refers to the initial training being delivered between July and September 2011. We've been looking at 2010. Are you able to tell us why it speaks of 2011 rather than 2010?
It may just be an error, a typo. I mean, it clearly says that we did do the training in 2010, and I believe we did the training in 2010.
And we've seen the documents?
Indeed.
So can you account for how that error came into this document?
No, I had no input into this document.
No. Now, can we then look at your second witness statement, please? LFB 000086213, page 7, paragraph 34, answering the question please set out details regarding the name and content of the refresher FSG training that was carried out between 2010 and 13 and detail to whom it was delivered. And paragraph 34, you exhibit some documents for details of individuals who attended refresher FSG training between 2010 and 2015. Please note the title of courses attended varies between entries. Are you able to clarify whether it was just new entrants that received that training in 2010 or existing control staff also?
I believe existing control staff also.
So even though we saw the March New Entrants Day, that training was also rolled out, was it, to existing staff?
Yes.
Yes. And I think the joining instructions that we saw attached to the September email had a whole lot of people who were already members of staff.
Yes.
Yes. So is it right that in fact there was a New Entrants Day in March, but an Old Entrants Day, if you like,
yes,
existing staff later in the year?
Yes.
Same programme?
I can't confirm it was the same programme, but a similar programme.
Right. Then I want to ask you next about pre-inquest action 8, and that's the role of fire safety officers in the development and delivery of FSG training packages. We've seen the reference, and you've confirmed the reference to fire safety in a number of the elements of the new entrants and existing staff training in 2010. Can we look back at the assurance report, please, LFB 404801, page 13, action 8. Action 8 is include an input from fire safety officers in control officers' fire survival guidance training in order to ensure that training for control officers complies with the requirements of the National Guidance Fire Service Circular 1093, training of fire control staff. And underneath that it says this: initial training and training for new entrants to the control room officer role in the fire survival guidance includes fire safety issues covering fire behaviour, building structure, types and concepts, and fire survival in accordance with the national guidance. This training material was designed by fire safety officers. Fire safety officers deliver training presentations on fire behaviour, fire survival and building structure, types and contents to new entrants to the control room officer role. The fire survival guidance presentations used for refreshing staff on the principles of fire survival guidance calls cover the basic elements of the national guidance with respect to escape from different types of properties and basic fire survival techniques to protect callers from the effects of flames, heat and smoke. Although recommended by the national guidance, fire safety officers are not involved in delivering fire survival guidance refresher training. Now, I read that all to you. Was there any fire safety officer input into training before the occurrence of the Lakenhall House fire in July 2009?
No.
So at that date, it would follow, wouldn't it, that the 1993 national guidance was in this respect not being followed?
I would agree with that.
This fire safety input was introduced because of what the national guidance document 1093 recommended.
Yes.
Namely, that the training should be presented jointly by fire control and fire safety personnel.
Yes.
Yes. And just for our reference purposes, that's LFB 403617, page 6. We don't need to turn it up. Could we go to your first statement, again, paragraph 20, page 6 this time, at the foot of that page. That says this, action 8, FSG training was amended to include input from fire safety officers within the new entrants training who provided an overview of fire behaviour and, if we turn the page, building construction. As part of that training, the new entrants receive a presentation from fire safety officers. In 2010, all staff, not just new entrants, received a presentation from a fire safety officer as part of the FSG training, providing an overview on fire behaviour and building construction. This was intended to take place every other year as part of the refresher training. This was the same presentation as that provided to new entrants. Now, were the packages with input from fire safety officers designed solely by fire safety officers, or was it a collaborative exercise between fire safety officers and the OST?
I think the OST collaborated, but I think obviously the the content was fire safety because it was about fire safety issues. But I think what was to be inputted would have come from OST as well.
Right. And why was it, after Lacknell, so important to have fire safety officers input into the creation and delivery of FSG training?
I think it was felt that to give control officers an overview of building types and fire behaviour.
I mean, clearly not simply for the purposes of closing the gap between LFB practice and national guidance. There was a tangible benefit.
Yes.
Yes. Now, in the last line of the same paragraph, you say, this was intended to take place every other year as part of the refresher training. This was the same presentation as that provided to new entrants. When you say this was intended to take place every other year, what was the this?
The fire safety training.
So the fire safety officers would create and also deliver
Yes.
presentation on fire behaviour and building construction.
Yes.
And that was going to be part of the refresher training for all CROs.
Yes.
Yes. That intention clearly changed at a later stage, didn't it?
It did.
Or rather, the realisation of that intention.
Yes.
Yes, and we'll come to that. I want, before we do come to that later, to ask you some questions about the content now of the FSG training presentations that we've looked at. You'll recall that not long ago this morning I asked you about an email sent by Chris Sharp in January 2010 that identified the 3 packages for the new entrants. Let's just go back to that if we can. LFB 00107484, page 2. And I just want to see if I can line these up with your exhibits. If we go to the first of those, it's call handling techniques conducted by control trainers. Now, that's what she says there. Let's look at your SH221 exhibit, which we find at LFB 00086219. Just have that on the screen. Call handling techniques, operational support team training. That's your exhibit 21. Can we fairly assume that that's the same, or that is the presentation referred to by Chris Sharp in the email?
It's the same or similar. This is op support. So in 2010 there would have been BCTS.
I see.
So it would have been broadly the same, but it's obviously been updated.
So BCTS was the forerunner of
Brigade
OST.
Control Training Team, yeah.
Right. Now, that's right. Now, did you see this at the time, this presentation, do you think?
It's something similar to this, yes.
Right. The second one that she refers to in her email, which I don't need to go back to, is Basics of Fire and Fire Development conducted by FS. Now, we don't hold a copy of the standalone presentation with that title. Have you seen one, do you think?
No, I believe that the fire safety presentation, whilst she's broken that down into elements of, I think that one presentation does cover those elements.
Right. The third one she refers to is Fire Development in the Firehouse at Southwark, conducted by Fire Safety. Now, we don't hold a copy of a standalone presentation with that title.
I think that was a visit to the firehouse, and they had on the handout there was like a floor plan of the firehouse, I believe, which is part of the same presentation.
So, right, was that training about Lacknell?
No, I don't think it was specific to Lackner.
Right. Was that just for new entrants, or was it also for the refreshers?
I think that was just for new entrants. I think at that stage we were just doing the new entrants to see what it looked like.
Right. The fourth one she refers to in her email is Building Types Means of Escape conducted by Fire Safety. I'd like just to tie that to your Exhibit 17, if I can, LFB 00086228. Is that the... I'll wait for it to come up. Building Types and Concepts. There it is. Is that the presentation to which Chris Sharp is referring?
Yes, or certainly broadly similar to.
And again, did you see that at the time?
I believe I did.
The next one, number 5, that she refers to is Case Studies, Human Behaviours conducted by FS, Fire Safety. we think we've identified that as LFB 30s41028. Can we have that up? It's dated 10th of March 2010, which would configure with
Yes.
the new entrance day. Is that the presentation she's referring to?
I believe so.
And does that include basics of fire and fire development?
I'm not sure. I'll have to scroll up. If we scrolled through, I could.
We can do that, actually, yes. If we go to page 2 and 3, that might give a hint. Introduction to fire.
Yes.
And then page 2, let's just quickly look at that. Summary of objectives, define combustion, etc.
Yes.
So can we take it that element was contained within this presentation?
Yes.
Looks like it. And then her last one, her sixth, was fire survival guidance, the policy and RIF conducted by control trainers. You have exhibited at SH219 a document at LFB 00086214. I just want to see if that document is the document to which Chris Sharp was referring in her email. That's LFB 00086214. Fire survival guidance, Brigade control training session. You see that?
Yes.
Again, is that the document?
It looks the same or
Ties
broadly
to-
similar to. Yeah.
Right, and again, you saw that at the time.
Yeah.
So to be clear, we've got 4, I think, of the 6 March 2010 training presentations referred to by Chris Sharp of OST, or BCTS as she was. Yes?
Yes.
And you saw those at the time. Right, that's been helpful to identify what we're looking at. Can we then start with the presentation on the screen, which is LFB 00086214, fire survival guidance, and it starts in the text below the box. Why are we doing this training? Incidents have occurred where control staff have been faced with a caller who is trapped by fire and are in a distressed condition. A fatal fire in the West Midlands highlighted that the control officer was unable to give the correct advice as they had not been given the training for such situations. The Home Office decided that we should all get this training. Now, that West Midlands fire, that was in the early 90s, was it?
That was the Merry Hill fire in 91, I believe.
Yes, and it was what led to the 93 circular
Did.
and the 1994 Keeping People Safe
Yes.
document. Yes. Now, why does this introduction not include a reference to the Lacknell House fire?
I don't know, is the answer. This was. I don't know, is the answer.
Would it not have been helpful to have mentioned that fire, a London fire with 6 deaths, so as to bring home to all control staff how important it was
Yes,
to conduct
yes,
the
it
training?
would have done. And I believe there's an update to this presentation to reflect the Lacknell.
There is an update which we can think date to 2012, which we will come to.
Okay.
But just focusing on this one, where it says the Home Office decided that we should all get this training, did it occur to you or anyone in your team that by saying that might reduce the significance of the course for some control staff, because it makes it sound as if it's something that they just have to get done?
I agree. I think, I mean, these are notes, so the staff wouldn't have seen those notes. They're obviously attached to the presentation. They'd have only seen the presentation, so I would like to think that it wasn't communicated that way. But I can't answer that.
No, but unhelpful, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Put a sentiment like that into the hands of trainers. I mean, you agree with me, I think, that it would have been better to say that the reason for delivering the FSG training was to make sure that the control officers were fully able to deal with FSG calls if they arose.
Yes.
Do you know why this training does not refer to FSC 5404, which was part of the extant guidance at the time?
How we interpreted 5404 was about the 3 phases, which weren't adopted by London Fire, so we didn't include it in the documentation.
Yes. I mean, to be fair to you, your gap analysis, although on the verge of being completed, hadn't yet been completed.
Yes.
Now, if we go to page 17, there's a slide entitled Passing Information to Crews. And it says always maintain effective communication with responding appliances, keeping appliances informed of developments, e.g. location of persons trapped, will be essential throughout the call to aid rescue. And then some text underneath it. Any subsequent relevant information must be passed immediately to the IC. It gives, as you can see, no assistance or guidance about how a control room officer should go about that, does it?
Well, the control officer, most of the information that's passed at this stage, information passed to the fireground was via radio. So a control officer would create the message on ProCAD, which would be sent to the radio operator. The radio operator would then communicate that to anybody on the fire, or the person at the fireground. At this stage, it was only one-way communication, so control would pass information down to the fireground. We didn't necessarily get feedback from that. If we needed information, we had to try and call. So there was no established communication at that point. So we'd pass information down, and that's where it stopped.
And this is in the days before
PN
even draft 155 as
Yes.
became policy 790.
Yes.
So just to be clear, this is addressing an existing structure of communication systems whereby the call handler receiving information from the caller
Yes.
would do no more than type it into ProCAD, it would go to the radio operator, and the radio operator would communicate that to the command unit.
But in the control room that we were in at that time, in the Isle of Dogs, it was that close that they would go back, you've got a message to pass. So information will be passed, and of course that will be available to the supervisor desk as well to make sure the information was going to go.
Right. Yes. When you moved to Merton, was any consideration given to the way the layout might have undermined that process?
It was, I mean, the control rooms were built they were being built during the fire control project, so that had already been decided. And it wasn't until we moved into Merton that we realised that the space was a lot bigger and people were further away, and it was a problem to begin with about communicating, because obviously the control staff were used to communicating verbally, being in the old control room, and now we had this huge space, and we had to look at other ways to communicate. They got round it, they'd still shout across the control room, so they did get round it and got used to it, but it was an issue that was raised.
Can you please remind us of the precise date when you moved into the Merton control room?
I believe it was February the 4th, 2012.
Now, if we go to page 21, there's a slide entitled Reassure. The FFs are on the way, they know where you are, the FFs are there. And the speaker note says, this will help to reassure the caller, keeping them calm, and will help to keep the conversation flowing. Do you agree that the slides do not take account of the warning in Circular 1093 that, quotes, the normal procedure of calming the caller may not be appropriate and may even be dangerous in some circumstances?
I'd agree.
And in fact, looking at it, that training was directly contrary to national guidance, wasn't it? Why is that?
I don't know. As I say, this presentation was updated, so maybe the presentation that we're seeing is not the presentation that was given on 2010. But of course, as my evidence shows, we moved away from the bonding, which is what the reassurance is here, because of that reason, and moved to more to reassess, which doesn't seem to be displayed in this presentation.
We know that come the conclusion of the internal investigations that led to the November 2012 Lacanal Control Report, that the problem had been identified, that callers were being told by call handlers that fire crews would reach them quickly, and that was problematic because it created false reassurance. Can you tell us why that wasn't recognised or reflected in this training at this earlier stage?
As I said, I believe this may not have been the presentation that was delivered in 2010 because it doesn't reflect the changes that we'd offered up.
Right.
So, because as I said, we were quite clear, and it was raised in our initial investigation that we did rely on bonding too much and not on reassessing the fire.
Yes. Do you accept this much, that at least come November 2012, once the lessons of Lacknell House had been understood and drawn by the brigade, it should have been obvious that that facet of this training was wrong?
I think there's a place for reassurance. I think the onus we put on reassurance at that time was wrong.
If we go to page 15 of this training, back a bit in it, to assessment, there's a box that says assess, which says this: do you know where the fire is, what's on fire, which room are you in, where is this in relation to the fire, which floor are you on? Questions will be dependent on the type of property, CFSG RIF. And then the next slide, at slide 16, says assess, for example, establish if the room the caller is in is located at the front stroke back of the property. Is anyone else in the property? Stroke where are they in the property? Record essential information. And looking at that, we know there was a problem at Lacknell where control officers tried to get information about the layout of the flats to establish the safest place in which the caller could be protected. But that proved problematic because in some flats there wasn't a safe room or callers were moving around.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Yes. Do you agree that those two slides I've just read under assessment don't acknowledge that problem or attempt to tackle it?
No, not in detail, no.
No. Let's next go to the next slide show, which is building types and concepts at LFB 000086228. This is the training delivered by the fire safety officers, as we've agreed, and you've told us you were familiar with it, or at least broadly familiar with something similar.
Yes.
In fact, if we go to LFB 001080027, we can see that you actually had provided comments on this presentation in March 2010. If we go to that email string and look at the second email on page 1, you can see that here is an email from Chris Sharp to Steve Willett, copied to you and Lindsay Turner. Building construction PP presentation, that's PowerPoint presentation. And it says, "Hi Steve, I've received feedback on your presentation from my POM, Scott Hayward, and he has asked for more work to be done on it." And then if you go to page 2, well, but maybe let me ask you before I go there. In general, what was the purpose of that presentation, building types and concepts?
To give control staff an overview of how buildings are built and constructive, and and sort of the fire risks associated with them.
Was it intended to cover the lessons learnt, at least thus far, at Lacknell?
I don't recall, but I would say yes.
Yes. And now on to page 2, if we may. And I'm sorry, I don't mean page 2 of the email run. Can I get back to the presentation itself? LFB 000086228. At page 2 in that presentation, it says this: Introduction, evacuation systems and the building design considerations that support them. Just to be clear, was that presentation intended to give control room officers training on how to handle calls?
Handle calls?
Well, let me put it more clearly. Was it intended to train them on how to handle calls, or simply teaching them or training them on the different evacuation systems and building types?
Yeah, it was just giving them an insight, an overview of building design, and evacuation systems in buildings.
And you just explain for us, if you would, why that was important information or experience for CROs to have?
Well, just to make them more aware. They were very much control orientated, and we wanted to give them a little bit more understanding. So when things are happening on the fire ground, that they get an understanding of why they're doing or asking for what they're asking for.
Now, we have examined this presentation in some detail, and we can't find anywhere where it explains anything about rapid fire spread or how firefighters tackle a fire in a high-rise building. And in fact, Jo Smith identified that very fact when she came to review this document in the August of the following year, 2011, which we may need to look at later. Or we may need to look at in a moment. But is that right? Why is that? Why is there no explanation in here about rapid fire spread or how firefighters tackle a fire?
Because I didn't think that control officers would necessarily. What would they do if they knew how a firefighter tackled a fire in their role? Their role is to take information from a caller and to pass that information to the fire ground. The idea of these was to give an overview and just let them know what happens out there, rather than the detail of how a firefighting team go in and do search and rescue, for example.
Well, focusing on rapid fire spread, given the experience at Lacknell, can you explain why the presentation explains nothing about rapid fire spread, the risks involved, and what to look out for?
No, I can't.
I mentioned to you a moment SOM Smith's review in August 2011.
Yep.
Perhaps we should look at that now. LFB 000284443. This is an email, if you go to the bottom of page 1, from Jo Stibbards, as she then was, to you, 29th of August 2011. Hi, Scott. I finally got round to reviewing, quotes, unquotes, the FSG training. It may be a good exercise for us all to do, as my review is pretty scathing, exclamation mark. Now, we will look at the rest of that in some detail, perhaps with you, but certainly with her at some point. But if you look at the attachment, please, that is at LFB 30083547. She attaches comments on each PowerPoint, as you can see from the second paragraph of the email. And if we go to LFB 00083547, here is her commentary on the training packages. And if you look at page 1, you can see, you'll need to scroll down a little bit further to 2/3 down the first page. She's dealing with I'm so sorry, just scroll back up again. It's got lost. Presentation 2, building types. And she says there, under that presentation, slide 2, evac strategies, lots and lots of information with very little to hold interest. And goes on, defend in place, generally flats. Advice does not emphasis government guidelines and actions, no visuals, no mention that high-rise flats normally have alternative escape routes, balconies leading to fire exits, etc. And then there's a point about slide 15, and then there is no current fire safety advice in here, and high-rise flats advice is wrong and contradicts the advice given on previous slides. This needs replacing with current government fire safety advice for high-rise dwellings. Can we look to how to streamline this? Do you know what? Did you do anything with that specific set of criticisms in relation to this specific presentation?
The presentations were subsequently updated. This is 2011 now, so the presentations were updated, and they will continue to be updated.
Do you know how it came about that the defects came into those presentations in the first place?
I believe they were existing. They were legacy presentations from before. I can't exactly remember when. No.
Right. Did nobody, when considering what PowerPoint packages to roll out to new entrants in 2010 or to existing control staff later in the same year, did nobody check what was going on in the Lacknell House investigation and seek to reflect in the training what had thus far been learnt?
Subsequently, yes, it did, yeah.
Subsequently, but why not at the time?
I can't remember. I can't recall. I don't know why.
I mean, given that you had completed your gap analysis in April 2010 and realised that the LFB was the training was inconsistent with the national guidance, and given that you were investigating what had happened at Lacknell House, can you explain why there was no system whereby the training that you were rolling out in 2010 did not reflect thus far what you'd learned about what had gone wrong at Lacknell House so far as control was concerned?
I can't. I mean, I think the Joanne obviously went back and reviewed the PowerPoint presentations. She's picked up significant issues there, which were subsequently updated later on. At the time, bearing in mind that no, I can't.
No. And although they were updated later on, as we'll come to see, later on was 2011 and after, once it had become much more difficult to train people on the watch.
Yes.
Once problems with the CBT had arisen, and the absence of fire safety and role play.
Yes, but at that time we weren't aware of those issues. They developed as time went on.
Yes. So as the presentations got better, the system for delivering them got worse.
Yes.
Let's go to LFB 00104578, please. This is the fire and human behaviour presentation referred to in Chris Sharp's email. This is dated 10th of March 2010. We saw it earlier. I think this presentation covered both the basics of fire development and human behaviour case studies, element of the list in her email.
I believe it did,
yes. And if we go to page 3, we can see the objectives set out in summary. Summary objectives. By the end of the session, you'll be able to define combustion, explain the triangle of fire, explain 3 ways that fire spreads, explain the terms flashover, backdraft, appreciate the relevance of human behaviour in fire. And I think this was another presentation delivered by fire safety officers, or was it not?
No, I believe this was delivered by training.
That's just by training.
Yeah.
Now, we can go through it, but would you agree that it doesn't provide, or didn't provide, CROs with any training on how to handle fire survival guidance calls?
In this presentation, no, it doesn't.
No. And doesn't include details about rapid external fire spread?
No.
No. And thus far, on what we've seen, do you agree that the packages weren't enabling control room staff to prepare to understand how modern building construction features, such as a cladding system, could contribute to rapid and unusual upwards fire spread?
No, it didn't.
And do you agree that in order to prepare for a worst case scenario involving such fire spread, it would have been necessary to produce the photographs and explanations of the cladding fires that had taken place thus far in the UK and overseas?
As an overview, I don't think if control staff would have had that information, you know, in my view, the control staff take information from callers and the information that callers are giving them, not visual representations on TVs of a fire spreading up a building. If that's what you're asking me, the idea of fire safety was to give an overview to control staff, not to give them tools to act on these sort of situations.
Well, it's really just a question of giving control room operators a visual prompt. This is what a cladding fire looks like, and giving them the means to at least understand what they're dealing with if one occurred. Was that ever something that was considered?
No.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Can we then look at another presentation, call handling techniques? This is Exhibit 40 to your first statement. LFB 3055232. If you just look at that on the screen and look at page 2, the aim, which is to examine challenges encountered by control staff when dealing with emergency calls. Now, if we look at your third statement, we don't need to go to it, I don't think, in fact, but you say that at paragraph 16.3 on page 5 that this was given to new entrants only. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah. I'd like to see a bit more of the presentation too,
certainly.
please.
Let's go to page 3, please, objectives. At the end of this session, you'll be able to identify possible difficulties, understand callers' difficulties, recognise the skills required to deal with a difficult call or caller, think on page 4. There's a picture of a multicoloured brain. Think what makes a difficult call, and then various other aspects of communication styles and matters of that nature.
Yes, I believe this is just given to new entrants.
Well, we've identified from the metadata that the file name includes refresher. Can you help with that?
No.
I mean, is it possible that this was, in fact, also delivered to existing staff?
It may well have been, but it wasn't a requirement to deliver this to existing staff. Because, of course, they get it in new entrants, and then on a day-to-day basis, when they're on shift, they're learning this all the time, because, of course, every call's different and people's behaviour are different. So it doesn't. You don't need to go over they establish the parent-child and those processes on a day-to-day basis on the job.
Right. Now, looking at the presentation, we found no mention of any proactive techniques that you identified in the gap analysis that should be included in the training. You'll recall we saw that yesterday.
Yes.
Do you know why that was?
I don't. Are you talking about proactive questioning?
Yes.
In this presentation.
In this presentation.
I think this is just about. I think that's in more the fire survival guidance presentation, where they talk about sort of questions you can ask, whether they're proactive or reactive, depending on the caller. I think this is about how, what sort of calls can be expected from people depending on their current state of mind, for example.
I see. I'd like to ask you about the changes that occurred to the content of the training after this year, 2010. We looked a moment ago at Jo Smith's email to you of the 29th of August 2011,
Yeah.
Where she said that her review was pretty scathing. Let's just move back to that email chain, NFB 000284443. That was at the foot of the page. I think I got as far as the first sentence.
Yep.
Where she said that her review was pretty scathing, and her embarrassment because Avon Fire and Rescue Service had asked to see it, and she approved that. Then she says, I've attached comments on each PowerPoint, and that's the document that was attached that we looked at. She says this: shall we generally discuss them at our weekly meeting? If Ron or Reet saw what we had put out as training, I think they would go nuts. And at the top of the email chain, she sends you another email correcting the one which she'd sent you about the recommendations as opposed to the RIF. So there seems to have been a problem with the document she sent you. Did you ask her to perform this review on the training?
Yes.
When did you ask her to do that?
I don't recall.
She says, I finally got round to reviewing the FSG training. She puts reviewing in quotation marks. Do you know how long you were waiting for it?
I don't recall.
Do you remember prodding her?
I always asked her to review the training documentation because obviously of her background in control.
Did you ask her why she had taken so long to get round to reviewing the FSG training?
No.
Why is that?
Because we have lots of tasks to do. I don't remember when I asked her to do it or how long it took for her to do it. If she said I've just got round, it could have been a couple of weeks. I don't know exactly when it was.
Right. What was the purpose of that review?
To review the training packages and make sure they were aligned with 1093.
Right. Now, the gap analysis we know was you put out or finalised in April 2010. This
Yep.
is now, excuse me, 18 months or so later, August 2011. And the training we saw rolled out in March 2010 to new entrants and September 2010 to existing staff. So that's a year on. What had happened in that time to prompt you to ask her to review the FSG training?
I don't recall.
Did you discuss her opinions about the training that she expressed in the recommendation?
Yes, yeah. I don't remember exactly what we said, but I'm sure we discussed it, because there were issues with training and the documentation, the presentations. You've seen previous emails where I've asked for it to be beefed up and to be more punchy. So, and I've obviously asked Joe to review on the back of that to see that it's been done, and clearly it wasn't.
And what was done, or was anything done, to improve the training packages in line with her comments so as to be able to give effect to her views?
I believe that the packages were updated again.
So there was an update programme, was there?
Yeah, I think that, and we try to review the packages as often as needed. But obviously after Lacanau and the updates that we aligned to 1093, that was the last update that I was aware of.
We are going, as we go through your evidence, to come to the training as it evolved from these beginnings through 2011, 2012 and thereafter.
Okay.
So we'll see what was done.
Okay.
Before we do that, let's go to another topic, which is role play. Mr. Chairman, I'm unlikely to finish this topic before lunch, but I'm quite willing to start it and use the...
Well, can you get to a sensible point to
yes,
break?
I think so.
Can you? All right, well, then
I'll try to.
carry on.
Can we then go back to the Lacanau Assurance Report, please, at LFB 404801? And I'd like to look at Action 11 on page 14 again. We looked at this earlier this morning, and the last paragraph I think I read to you, but I just want to show you again. This learning was supplemented for a number of control staff with a fire survival guidance role play. A number of fire survival guidance scenarios were developed with the purpose of embedding learning and allowing control staff to practically explore this learning in a realistic situation. Now, that role play, am I right, was introduced in order to comply with National Guidance 1093?
Yes.
And if we look again at the 1994 document, Keeping People Safe at LFB 404750, page 28. We saw this yesterday, but I'll just show it to you again to remind you of it. This is training presentation. The training package to be presented jointly by fire control and fire safety personnel, and to comprise a lecture session of 1 to 1.5 hours, followed by a practical role play. The role play will assess the instruction given by measuring the student's ability to do 4 things: establish whether the caller can get out and stay out, recognise unusual responses, determine the location and situation of the caller, and follow the sequence of prompts devised to give appropriate guidance to the caller. And then there are 9 subjects, and the 9th of which is practical session role play, as you can see there.
Yes.
And the instructor there was fire control and fire safety. You see that?
No, it's just off the page, but I did briefly see it beforehand.
You're right. There it is now.
Thank you.
I apologise. But a 9, practical session role play, fire control, fire safety. Yes?
Yes.
So the national guidance, as we can see, recommends active role play, where the CRO would need to carry out the role play itself.
Yes.
Yes. And that should be assessed.
Yes.
Now, can we go to your first witness statement, please, at page 24, paragraph 69. You say, in the first sentence, or two sentences. During the full day's FSG training, it was intended that staff members should undertake role-play exercises. I believe that active role-play, i.e. role-play in which staff members took part, was used in 2010. Did you ever observe an active role-play session yourself?
No. Not
Why
that I
not?
recall, anyway.
Why is that? Why didn't you?
I don't know. It was training detail. I didn't. I saw an overview of the presentations and the fact that role play would be in it, but I didn't sit and observe control staff actually doing it.
Would it not have been helpful to have seen how that part of the training was being delivered?
In what way? Because I've done active role play, so I know that I understand the benefits of active role play. So from that perspective, I was happy that it was a good, positive way of training.
Yes, but exactly. And therefore, would it not have been helpful to you in your role overseeing training to have seen how that element, recommended by national guidance, was being delivered?
In hindsight, yes, but I don't recall doing it at the time.
Right. Do you remember how long each role play exercise lasted, at least when they were carried out?
I don't, but I wouldn't have thought very long.
No. Now, can we go to LFB 001-04538? I think you've told us in your second statement, your third statement, at paragraph 19, that you couldn't find a copy of the role play exercise used in 2010.
No.
And you don't remember whether anything was written down. We have identified this document from March 2010, fire survival scenarios, so fire survival role play. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember this document?
No.
Looking at it now? No?
No.
So it's certainly one that you weren't able to locate, or the LFB wasn't.
No.
Right. It says fire survival role play non-accessible. Why was it non-accessible?
I don't know. It should have been accessible.
Yes. And if we scroll through pages 2 to 5, we can see that there were 4 scenarios. If just scroll down to 1. Scenario 1, able to escape from Romford Road. Scenario 2, trapped in bedroom, possible escape via window in the Old Kent Road. Scenario 3, fire in flat next to caller's flat, caller unable to escape in Black Prince Road in SE1. At page 5, scenario 4, fire in kitchen in a bungalow, very bad fire, debris falling from ceiling in Streatham. And if you look at all of those, is it right? Do you remember that each of those would be practiced by the CRO? Do you know how this would have worked?
Yeah, the trainer would have rung the CRO and gone through, and acted out as a caller going through this process.
Right. So the trainer would play the caller.
Yes.
And the CRO would play themselves.
And another trainer behind them to watch
Right.
them do it and maybe give advice.
And at the end on page 6, it says learning outcomes. And there are some headings there. Were those the learning outcomes against which the Crows should have been assessed, had it been accessible?
Yes.
And if you look at the last line on page 6, which I think we need to scroll down for, call handling, you see that?
Yes.
Very last line, was a relationship built with the caller, you see that?
Yes.
Now, this gap analysis that you did was completed in April 2010.
Yes.
So about a month after this role play document. So to be fair to you, the gap had only been finally identified then. But were you concerned that this reference to building a relationship with the caller might be contrary to national guidance, which discouraged creating an emotional link with the caller?
As I said, I think the reassurance element and the building, particularly if it's a long fire survival call, the building a relationship with a call, exchange names is appropriate. It's just that I think that what we did prior to Lacanau is that we bonded too much and we got too much into conversations with the caller about family and things that perhaps detracted away from the fact that we should be looking to assess and see what else we can do to help. So I don't think it's wrong. I just think we used it too much, if that makes sense.
Right. Can you tell us, with any degree of certainty or confidence, whether this role-play document that's on the screen was actually used in 2010 or not?
I can't say whether it was or not.
You don't know whether it was.
But the date fits, so I'd like to think it did.
Right. Let me just show you one or two parts of your third statement then. Paragraph 20, if we can go to that on page 6. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just cover this off before the break, if I may.
Yes, all right.
You say in paragraph 20 on page 6, in answer to the question, if you have been unable to obtain a copy of the role-play exercise used in 2010, or if the exercise was not documented, are you able to recall what it involved? The trainer would call, this is your answer, the trainer would call the CRAs participating in training from a separate room. The trainer would then act out an FSG call, and the CRO would be expected to respond to the FSG call. There were no required points to cover. However, the trainer would be expected to ensure the trainee followed the structure of the FSG Reference Information Form, RIF. The trainer would be an experienced Assistant Operations Manager, AOM, and would draw upon their experience to improvise a role-play scenario for the mock call. Now, in the light of the document from March 2010 that I've just shown you, would you like to revise that paragraph in any way?
I think fundamentally that's exactly what happened. The trainer, the fact that the trainer had a script to run from potentially, it doesn't detract from the fact that the trainer could, like they do with other calls, not necessarily FSG, would for new entrants would call a caller and make up a call on the, as they go, because
Right.
that's what they do as part of their role.
You say there were no required points to cover here in paragraph 20, but in fact, if the March 2010 document was used as the basis for role play, that's not right, is it?
No, but they're to follow the RIF, so the points are be highlighted on the RIF. They're the points, aren't they? If they're following the RIF down. So what had I seen that document, then yes, obviously there are points to cover. But I think in this situation, the new entrant will be sitting there with a RIF up in front of them on the screen, and they will be following that RIF because that's what we train them to do. But yes, in that situation, if there were no points to cover, there clearly were, but I hadn't seen that. I wasn't aware of that document.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment? I'm sorry we've gone a little bit long.
No, don't worry. But that is a convenient moment. I think it's time we had some lunch, Mr. Hayward, so we'll stop now. We'll come back at 2:05, please.
Okay, sir.
And please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Thank you very much.
Right? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 2:05, please.
Mr. Chairman.